Senator from Montana.
Mr. President, I ask that further proceedings of the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask consent that the following staff of the Finance Committee be allowed on the Senate floor for the duration of today's session and the debate on S-2204. Juan Mercado, David Sklar, Haroon Dogo, and Abital Barnara.
Without objection.
Mr. President, the British statesman Edmund Burke said, "All government, indeed every human benefit and enjoyment, every virtue, and every prudent act is founded on compromise and barter." Compromise and barter, that means give and take in order to work things out. I want to apply Burke's famous aphorism to the two leaders of the Environment and Public Works Committee, the chairman, Senator Barbara Boxer of California, and the ranking member, Senator Jim Inhofe of Oklahoma. One of the Senate's leading liberals and one of the Senate's most dyed-in-the-wool conservatives. While Senators Boxer and Inhofe openly acknowledge that there is much they do not agree on, they both agree transportation infrastructure is a smart investment in American road safety and jobs. So they worked hard to craft a consensus highway bill that three-quarters of the Senate could agree to. I've always believed that this kind of cooperation is the key to success. We can do great things for this country when we work together. When I had the honor of leading the Environment and Public Works Committee, I also had the true, distinct pleasure of working with senators from both parties who understood Burke's principle of barter and compromise, such as John Warner of Virginia and John Chafee of Rhode Island. So it is very gratifying to know that tradition of the Environment and Public Works Committee continues to be strongly upheld by the chairman and the ranking member today. In order to craft the highway bill, both of these leaders faced pressures not to compromise. Each had ample opportunity to give into those pressures and to give up on the bill. But instead of drawing lines in the sand and pointing fingers, they chose to reach out their hands and meet in the middle. They talked to each other, and more importantly, they listened. They opted for pragmatism over ideology. They disagreed without being disagreeable. They worked closely with Senator Vitter and myself to incorporate the best ideas from all sides. And ultimately, those good faith efforts prevailed. They prevailed when the committee reported our highway bill title with unanimous support. We continued working together to meld that product with contributions from the Banking Committee and the Commerce Committee, along with a fiscally responsible plan to pay for this investment from the Finance Committee. Earlier this month, 75% of the Senate came together to pass a highway bill that will create or sustain approximately 1.8 million American jobs each year. That's according to the Department of Transportation. What a tremendous achievement reached by working together, creating or sustaining $1.8 million jobs a year. For my state of Montana, this bill will create or sustain 14,000 jobs each year, and it cuts through red tape to put people to work on those jobs even faster. It gives the state of Montana and our local communities the flexibility they need to fund the alternative transportation projects that work best for them. It invests in the Land Water Conservation Fund and continues a vital program to support our timber communities. And it does it all without adding one single dime to the federal deficit. Simply put, this bill is an investment in jobs we can't afford to pass up. And that's why this weekend, Montana's largest newspaper, the Billings Gazette, called on the House to pass the Senate bill. And I joined that call today. The current highway bill expires at the end of this month. and the construction season is starting soon. As the Gazette notes, a short-term extension doesn't provide the certainty we need to get highway projects off the ground and workers on the job. We cannot afford to put these jobs on hold by kicking the can down the road, especially when we don't have to, and also especially when we don't have much more road to kick the can down. The Senate bill is the product of months of debate and cooperation, of give and take from all sides, carefully crafted into a bipartisan investment we can all be proud to support. It has already passed the test of overwhelmingly bipartisan support in the Senate, and there's no reason the House should not take up this bill and pass it right away. The House should understand that we need to work together to achieve solutions the American people rely upon. Edmund Burke understood that. Thankfully, Senators Boxer and Inhofe clearly understand it too. And I want to thank them for that. Mr. President, I suggest, Mr. President, now asked to speak on another matter. Mr. President, President Truman once said, "Healthy citizens constitute our greatest national resource." 2 years ago, last week, we passed the Affordable Care Act. We passed it to help give every American access to quality, affordable health care. People like Cease Whitney from Helena, Montana know exactly how much help this law provides. Doctors diagnosed Cease with cystic fibrosis by age 7. By high school, she carried an oxygen tank. And by the end of college, she received a double lung transplant. Even with insurance coverage, Cease and her family paid tens of thousands of dollars out of pocket. But things looked even worse when she hit an arbitrary coverage limit. And if she had lost her insurance before health reform, she might not have been able to find any insurance coverage at all. Insurance companies could have turned her away simply because she was born with cystic fibrosis. But now, thanks to the Affordable Care Act, Cease will always be covered. She'll always have access to the care she needs. A year ago, on the Affordable Care Act's first anniversary, Cease shared her story about seeing health reform signed into law with her local newspaper. She said she cried tears, tears of extreme joy. And she wrote, and I quote, "I knew that I no longer had to worry about losing or being denied coverage because of my pre-existing condition. And I no longer was going to be denied coverage for exceeding arbitrary caps set by insurance companies." End quote. Cease's story is not unique. Health reform is working for people in Montana and across the country, and it's saving them money. The law improved our health care system to focus on prevention and keep Americans healthy. We had reforms to pay for quality care rather than quantity of services. And in just 2 years, health reform has lowered costs for millions of Americans. Parents can now afford to cover their entire family, including children up to the age 26. More than 2.5 million young adults have been able to stay on their parents' plans thanks to health reform. 2.5 million. Prescription drugs are now cheaper for seniors because of the Act. Already more than 5 million Medicare beneficiaries have saved more than $3 billion on drugs. Again, that's $3 billion saved by seniors on drugs. And health reform eliminates the so-called Medicare prescription drug donut hole. This puts dollars back in seniors' pockets, dollars that they can use for groceries or electricity bills. Seniors now receive free annual wellness visits. They receive free screenings. This focus on prevention leads to better health outcomes, keeps them healthier. And it saves money by allowing seniors and their doctors to catch conditions like high blood pressure or diabetes before they become serious and costly. Health reform also helps those who wish to retire early to afford insurance until they qualify for Medicare. The law has provided almost $4.5 billion to aid in businesses to give early retiree coverage to these employees. Let me repeat that. The law has provided almost $4.5 billion to aid to businesses to enable them to give early retiree coverage for their employees. Health reform is also saving Americans money through new consumer protections. It's ending insurance company abuses. Medical loss ratio is the one that most firmly comes to my mind. Because of health reform, parents can now keep their kids who have pre-existing conditions on their plans, and insurance companies can no longer exclude these children. Insurance companies can no longer place lifetime and restrictive yearly limits on their health coverage that cost Americans like Cease Whitney tens of thousands of dollars. And insurance companies can no longer go back and scrutinize applications for tiny errors as a way to deny payments after a customer gets sick. Health reform has also created the Medicare and Medicaid Innovation Center to put good ideas from the private sector into action. This center is already working with more than 7,100 organizations, hospitals, physicians, consumer groups, and employers included, reducing costly hospital readmissions. Health reform provided law enforcement with new tools and resources to protect Medicare and Medicaid from fraud and abuse. These efforts recovered more than $4 billion last year. New anti-fraud provisions in the Act, in the health care bill, helped recover more than $4 billion in fraud last year. And just a few weeks ago, federal agents made the largest Medicare fraud bust in U.S. history. 91 people were charged with defrauding taxpayers for nearly $300 million. More parts of the Affordable Care Act that will help consumers will start in the year 2014, including the state-based affordable insurance exchanges. On these exchanges, people will be able to save money. How? By shopping for an insurance plan that's right for them. It's like getting on Expedia or Orbis. Just get on, shop around, you find the one that's best for you. For too long, individuals and small businesses shopping for insurance on their own have had very limited options. The plans that were available were often too expensive. But now, for the first time, insurance companies will have to compete against each other for business on a level playing field. That will mean lower premiums, better coverage, and more choices. Health reform has also reduced government costs by dramatically slowing the growth in spending. According to our nonpartisan scorekeeper at the Congressional Budget Office, health reform slowed the growth in health spending by 4%. That will save taxpayers dollars and help get our deficit problem under control. We need to let the law keep working to save families and taxpayers more money. The Congressional Budget Office tells us that repealing the Affordable Care Act, repealing it now, would increase the federal deficit by nearly $143 billion over the next decade. Repeal would cost the federal deficit $143 billion over the next decade, according to the Congressional Budget Office. And it would increase the deficit by more than $1 trillion in the decade after that. Repealing health reform would also leave tens of millions of Americans without insurance. Studies have shown this would cost every American family an extra $1,000 a year. Boy, that's something that we just can't afford. The Affordable Care Act has already saved millions of Americans money and helped them get affordable health care, and millions more will gain access in the coming years. Healthy citizens are indeed the greatest asset our country has. We need to let health reform keep working for all Americans. Mr. President, I'll give you the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Arizona.
Mr. President, first I would like to take a moment to wish Vice President Cheney well as he recovers from his big-time heart transplant surgery. My wife Carol and I have him in our thoughts and prayers, and we send our best wishes to him and to his entire family. I'm sure that the angler, as he was called, would rather be out fishing in Wyoming on the Snake River where I know he's been very, very happy. I hope he can get back out west soon. In the meantime, I know he's fortified by his wonderful family, his wife Lynn, his 2 daughters, and his grandchildren. We wish him all the best. Second, Mr. President, in a recent column in the Arizona Republic, my friend Bob Robb laid out a very thoughtful contrast between President Obama's budget and the alternative put forth by the House Budget Committee Chairman Paul Ryan, which the House of Representatives will be acting on this week. In his column, Robb notes that the Ryan budget would get the federal deficit below 3% of GDP by 2015, and after a decade would reduce our debt-to-GDP ratio from today's 100% to about 87%, or just under the share that many economists believe affects private sector economic performance and casts doubt on the government's ability to even repay its obligations. Robb explains, and I quote, that despite the caterwauling of critics, Ryan doesn't achieve this through brutal budget cuts. Quite the contrary. He explains why the Ryan budget would allow spending to increase about 3% each year compared to the Obama budget 5% annual increases. And he concludes that low interest rates are currently muting the effects of our growing debt on the economy, but could change overnight. As he put it, if it changes, the federal government will have to take action much more drastic and quicker than the relatively gentle and gradual pathway provided by the Ryan budget, end of quote. Mr. President, I hope senators will take a few moments to review this column in its entirety and ask unanimous consent that it appear in the record at this point.
Without objection.
Thank you. Third, as we know, Mr. President, today the Supreme Court began hearing arguments about the constitutionality of the Affordable Care Act. It's one of the most critically important Supreme Court cases of our time. A Wall Street Journal editorial noted last Friday, and I'm quoting, "Few legal cases in the modern era are as consequential or as defining as the challenges to this law. The powers that the Obama administration is claiming change the structure of the American government as it has existed for 225 years. Constitutional questions the Affordable Care Act poses are great, novel, and grave," end of quote. The editorial, entitled "Liberty and Obamacare," lays out the constitutional problems with the Affordable Health Care Act and focuses on the bill's centerpiece, the individual mandate to purchase health insurance. As the editorial notes, the case against this provision is anchored in ample constitutional precedent, and I quote their conclusion. "The Commerce Clause that the government invokes to defend such regulation is always applied to commercial and economic transactions, not to individuals as members of society. The Court has never held that the Commerce Clause is an ad hoc license for anything the government wants to do," end of quote. Mr. President, I urge my colleagues to read this article and ask that it be inserted in the record at this point.
Without objection.
And finally, continuing the point about the argument on Obamacare and referring to a different piece that appeared in the Wall Street Journal, I wanted to talk just a little bit in more detail about the justification of this mandate to purchase health insurance, the requirement that every individual in the United States be the recipient of a specifically defined policy by the United States government. The rationale that the government has provided is that if we don't do this, then free riders or people who don't have insurance but might get sick will end up shifting all of the burden of their care on to the rest of us. And therefore, the government needs to regulate that by forcing everybody to buy insurance. Well, on March 20th, the Journal published a piece by Douglas Holtz-Eakin and Vernon Smith, a former CBO director and an economics professor, respectively, which I think really debunks this argument on the merits. It explains the real reason why this mandate, as well as a dramatic expansion of Medicaid, are both unconstitutional. And I just wanted to recite or highlight, perhaps, the points that they make here. First, Holtz-Eakin and Smith address this individual mandate question. States, of course, have general police power to regulate the conduct of their citizens, but federal power, by contrast, is very limited over individuals. The authors here make the important point that health care policy has traditionally been a state's function. Health care needs relate to individuals and vary from person to person and region to region. As a policy matter, states have a better understanding of what kind of improvements to health care access are needed. And here's what they wrote. Quote, The administration's attempt to fashion a singular, universal solution is not necessary to deal with the variegated issues arising in these markets. States have taken the lead in past reform efforts. They should be an integral part of improving the functioning of health care and health insurance markets, end of quote. So if the states have the legal power to address health issues and they're better equipped to do so, then where does the justification for federal jurisdiction come from? The authors note that the administration's argument is that the federal government mandate is needed to address the cost shifting, the thing that I talked about before. But they note that this is a red herring. In reality, they write, the mandate has almost nothing to do with cost shifting, end of quote. And that's because, in actuality, the young and the healthy, the people that aren't buying health insurance, aren't imposing much of a burden on the system because they don't get sick that often. They don't need as much insurance because they don't need as much health care. And the authors say, quote, the insurance mandate cannot reasonably be justified on the ground that it remedies costs imposed on the system by the voluntarily uninsured. In other words, as I said, there isn't that much free riding going on. The authors conclude that the real purpose of the mandate is not to decrease the costs of uncompensated care. It's meant to force the young and the healthy to buy health insurance at rates far above the amount and scope of coverage that they actually need because they're generally healthy individuals. But this extra money will help fund health insurance companies and therefore offset the huge increased costs imposed upon them by Obamacare's many new regulations. This is the real reason for the individual mandate. In fact, as an amicus brief by over 100 economists points out, and I quote, the Affordable Care Act is projected to impose total net costs of $360 billion on health insurance companies from 2012 through 2021, end of quote. With the mandate, however, quote, insurance companies can be expected to essentially break even, end of quote. Well, this is no coincidence. So if this is the real justification for the mandate to purchase health care, I submit that it should have been done through an enumerated power, perhaps under the tax power of the federal government, which is at least one of the powers that the Constitution explicitly provides. In any event, this individual mandate cannot be justified to regulate interstate commerce. Now, the supporters of the mandate have therefore introduced a second argument. They say, well, health care is just different from all other commerce. It's bigger, everybody has to have health care, as if they didn't have to have food on the table or shelter over their head or clothes on their back and so on. But in any event, they say that health care is different. And somehow this difference gives Congress the right to force people to buy government-defined health insurance under its authority to regulate interstate commerce. But the argument that this market is different is beside the point, even if it were true, because it does not articulate a constitutional limitation that is judicially enforceable. The question before the Court is whether there's any limit to Congress's power to regulate commerce. Obviously, the framers would never have countenanced a federal requirement to purchase a product so that the government could then regulate it. So what limit on constitutional power is suggested by the health care market? None. And that is precisely the point. The government cannot draw a line. And as a result, it would have to argue that there is no limit to its powers, and that, of course, would run counter to the reason why the framers put limitations into the Constitution. Well, the individual mandate is not the only provision in Obamacare that's constitutionally impermissible. The Medicaid expansion is also violative. While Congress has well-established power to use its purse strings to encourage the states to adopt certain federal policies, it cannot force them or compel them to do so. Obamacare's Medicaid expansion essentially coerces the states into complying with new Medicaid policies, and this occurs in two different ways. First, if a state does not comply with the Obamacare eligibility expansion, it would lose all of its federal Medicaid funds, even for patient populations that the state had already covered long before Obamacare was passed. Few, if any, states would be able to continue their existing Medicaid programs if they lost all of this federal funding. An amicus brief signed by over 100 economists examined Medicaid data to determine the economic impact of states losing all of their Medicaid funds, and it found that if states were forced to absorb federal Medicaid expenditures into their own state budgets, quote, the state's total budgetary expenditures would jump by 22.5%, end of quote. In other words, there's no real choice. The options for states are do as the federal government says or leave Medicaid, which by now is so ingrained in the care for the indigent that unwinding it, in effect disentangling it from existing state-federal relationships, would be virtually impossible and would obviously jeopardize care for the population without other health coverage. This is coercion, plain and simple. It's unconstitutional. And second, Obamacare expands Medicaid eligibility to everyone under 138% of the federal poverty level. For individuals who make less than 138% of the poverty level, Obamacare provides no means for complying with the individual mandate other than enrolling in Medicaid. In their brief to the Supreme Court, the states suing over the Medicaid expansion said it best, quote, when Congress mandates that Medicaid-eligible individuals maintain insurance but provides no alternative means for them to obtain it, it is impossible to label the state's participation in Medicaid voluntary, end of quote. If it's the only way you can get it, it's not voluntary. Well, Obamacare as a whole cannot survive without these unconstitutional provisions, and these are the reasons why I believe that it will and, in fact, should be struck down as unconstitutional. Mr. President, the last thing that I'd like to comment on is an unrelated subject. It has to do with comments that the President was overheard making in a meeting that he was holding with Russian President Dmitry Medvedev at the Nuclear Security Summit in South Korea. He had a hot mic, which in other words captured comments that he was making privately to President Medvedev. And he requested a little space, as he put it, in negotiations over missile defense issues until after the election, when he said he would have more flexibility. Well, obviously, this presents a problem that is going to have to be discussed with the U.S. Congress, because if the President is in effect saying that he'd like to make a deal to limit U.S. missile defenses now, but he would be accountable to the American public if they became aware of it before his re-election bid, it would be very difficult for him to make the kind of concessions that Medvedev wants. But if the Russian President will just wait until after the next election, then the President will have more flexibility to work with the Russians on what they want. Well, Medvedev very helpfully said, I will pass this on to Vladimir. Mr. President, here are a few things we know. We know that President Obama canceled plans to station anti-ballistic missile defense systems in Poland and Czech Republic. We know the President supported language in the New START treaty to link missile defense to nuclear reductions. We know the administration is sharing information with Russia, including plans to deploy missile defenses in Europe. We know the President has significantly reduced funding for and curtailed development of the U.S. national missile defense system, undermining our ability to effectively intercept long-range ballistic missiles. And we know the President has doubled down on efforts to reduce our nuclear arsenal while failing to honor his promises to modernize the aging nuclear weapon complex. What we don't know is what President Obama has in mind for working with the Russians after his re-election, when he would, as he put it, have some flexibility in negotiating with them. Perhaps the Russians, in whom the President confided, could shed some light on missile defense plans. Perhaps the President should shed that light on these negotiations with the American people before discussing them with the Russians. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The Republican leader.
As Americans filled up their cars with gas this weekend, I'm sure a lot of them wondered how much higher gas prices could actually go. Well, today the Democratic-controlled Senate plans to send these folks a message. If they had their way, gas prices would be even higher. Today, Democrats will propose raising taxes on America's energy manufacturers, something common sense and basic economics tell us will lead to even higher prices at the pump. This is the Democratic response to high gas prices. And frankly, I can't think of a better way to illustrate how completely and totally out of touch they are on this issue. And that's why Republicans plan to support moving forward on a debate over the legislation, because it's a debate the country deserves. We're going to use this opportunity to explain how out of touch Democrats are on high gas prices and put a spotlight on the common sense ideas Republicans have been urging for years, ideas that reflect our genuine commitment to the kind of all-of-the-above approach the President claims to support but actually doesn't. Look, this isn't terribly complicated. Americans from Maine to California are frustrated at high gas prices. And what do they see in Washington? They see Democrats pushing legislation that even they admit doesn't have a thing to do with lowering gas prices. At least 7 Democrats are on record saying this bill doesn't do a thing to lower gas prices. Last year, its own sponsor said that nobody's made the claim that this is about reducing gas prices, all of which raises an obvious question. What are we doing it for? How does this help the American people now? Of course it doesn't. In response to record high gas prices, Democrats in Congress want to raise taxes on the very people who produce it. Meanwhile, the President is blocking a pipeline that would decrease our dependence on Middle East oil and create thousands, literally thousands, of American jobs. Americans see the Democratic response to high gas prices to make them even worse. That's the Democrats' response to high gas prices, to make them even worse. And they're starting to wonder if this might as well be the Democrats' official slogan, vote for us and we'll make things worse. Because whether it's jobs or debt or spending or gas prices, that's the Democratic record. Which leads me to health care. Today, as we all know, the Supreme Court began hearing arguments on the President's health care law. Among other things, the Court will consider whether the mandate at the core of this law is constitutional. And as one of the many public officials who filed a brief before the Court opposing this law, I believe strongly that the law is in fact unconstitutional, and I hope the Court agrees. But even if the Court ends up disagreeing with me, the case for repeal has become increasingly difficult to refute. The President was right to seek reform, but the bill he gave us and that the Democrats forced through Congress on a party line vote just isn't working. Instead of lowering costs, it's increasing them. Instead of strengthening Medicare, it raided Medicare. Instead of helping states, it's created financial burdens they can't even bear. Instead of lowering insurance premiums, it's caused them to actually go up. When it comes to jobs, some have called the law the single biggest detriment to job creation in America right now. And most Americans believe it's unconstitutional. This law is a mess, an absolute mess. And regardless of what the Court decides, it needs to be repealed and replaced with common sense reforms that actually lower costs and that Americans really want. So we'll keep one eye on the Supreme Court this week, and we're basing our opinion on something simpler than the legal arguments we'll hear this week. We're looking at whether this law helped or hurt. And on that question, the verdict's already in. Just like so much else this President has done over the past few years. Look, we need health care reform, but this law has made things worse. And on that basis alone, it should be repealed and replaced. That's what Americans want. That's what we plan to do. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Michigan.
Mr. President, once again, oil prices have spiked to high levels, threatening our economic recovery. Prices are now nearing $110 a barrel, up nearly 30% since October of 2011, only 5 months ago. For years now, the commodity markets have taken the American people on an expensive and damaging roller coaster ride with rapidly changing prices for crude oil. In 2007, a barrel of crude oil started out costing $50 a barrel. By the end of the year, the price had nearly doubled. In 2008, oil prices shot up in July to nearly $150 a barrel, and then by the end of the year crashed to $35. In the beginning of 2011, oil prices took off again, climbing to over $110 per barrel in May. Then they began falling, and in October, oil traded at $75 per barrel, a drop of more than 30% over 4 months. Now, 5 months later, oil prices are back up to nearly $110 a barrel. This unpredictable and incessant price volatility is burdening American consumers and businesses with both uncertainty and expense. Some in the media are blaming recent events in the Middle East for the latest oil price spikes, but Middle East instability can't explain these large gyrations. We have seen uncertainty, unrest, and armed conflict in that region for more than 50 years without seeing this same pattern of extreme price volatility in oil prices. That volatility has become a feature of U.S. oil markets over the last 7 years. There's something else at work, Mr. President, behind the spikes and sudden drops in the price of oil and other commodities in recent years, and we have strong evidence showing what it is. It's the increasing role of market speculators betting on price swings. For years now, the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, which I chair, has been digging into the problem of excessive speculation in the commodity markets. Since 2002, the subcommittee has conducted a series of investigations into commodity pricing, focusing in particular on how speculators have changed the game. Our investigations have used specific case histories involving oil, natural gas, and wheat prices to show how excessive speculation in the futures and swaps markets have distorted prices, overwhelmed normal supply and demand factors, and pushed up prices at the expense of consumers and American business. In 2006, for example, the subcommittee released a report that found that billions of dollars in commodity index trading by speculators in the crude oil market had helped push up futures prices in 2006, caused a corresponding increase in cash prices, and was responsible for an estimated $20 out of the then $70 cost for a barrel of oil. Since then, even more speculators have entered the commodities markets. Today we have commodity index traders, exchange-traded products, and even mutual funds betting billions of dollars on crude oil prices on a daily basis. Speculators have now come to dominate our futures and swaps markets, overwhelming the commercial users and producers whose use and need these markets used to set fair prices and hedge risk. At a November hearing before my subcommittee, the chairman of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, Gary Gensler, testified that over 80% of the outstanding futures contracts for crude oil are now held by speculators. That fact is new, it's significant, and we cannot ignore it. It used to be that prices were determined primarily by fundamental market forces of supply and demand for physical commodities. When commodities were tight and demand high, prices generally went up. In contrast, when supplies were ample and demand low, prices generally went down. Nowadays, that relationship is largely absent. Here are some startling facts from recent press and government reports that show how U.S. crude oil prices today have been disconnected to supply and demand. First is the fact that the United States has ample oil supplies in the neighborhood of 350 million barrels in storage, which is toward the higher range since 2008. World supplies are also adequate, with the Saudi Arabian oil minister recently stating that world supplies are stronger today than they were 4 years ago in 2008. In addition, the United States is producing more domestic oil than it has in years. In 2010, U.S. domestic crude oil production increased to 5.5 million barrels per day, up from 5.1 million barrels in 2007, and is still climbing. In 2011, overall U.S. refining capacity also increased. Perhaps most surprising of all, in 2011, for the first time since 1949, the United States exported more gasoline, diesel, and other petroleum products than it imported. The United States is projected to do the same in 2012 and 2013. At the same time, U.S. oil supplies stayed steady and production increased. U.S. demand went down. In 2011, U.S. fuel consumption actually sank, and oil demand in North America contracted by 0.5%. Some of that drop was due to lower economic activity, some to greater energy efficiencies, and some to higher energy costs. For example, U.S. demand for gasoline sank nearly 3% last year. More broadly, in 2011, total U.S. demand for all types of oil products fell to 18.8 million barrels a day from 20.8 million barrels a day in 2005. That's a drop of 10%. The end result is that over the last year, oil demand was down and supply was up in the United States. Under normal economic conditions, both factors should have led to lower oil prices. Instead, despite steady or improving oil supplies and steady or dropping demand, U.S. crude oil prices became more like a roller coaster than ever. Now, what explains the price volatility and escalation? The answer is pretty clear to me after 10 years of investigations by our subcommittee, and it's the large amount of speculation in oil markets which is a major contributing factor to high prices. Speculators who now comprise more than 80% of the U.S. futures oil market are bidding on contracts, speculating on price swings, and helping to drive up price volatility and crude oil prices. Higher crude oil prices translate directly into higher gasoline prices. According to a February 27, 2012 article in Forbes magazine, citing a recent report by Goldman Sachs, oil speculation, quote, translates out into a premium for gasoline at the pump of 56 cents a gallon. In other words, speculation is adding 56 cents to the price of each gallon of gas bought at the pump. Now, here is a Reuters chart that uses CFTC data. It focuses on the crude oil holdings of speculators, the group of traders that the CFTC refers to as managed money, and which includes commodity index funds, hedge funds, commodity pool operators, and commodity trading advisors. The chart uses CFTC data to track the ratio of their long to short crude oil futures holdings over time. Last month, there was a spike, way over here to the right. Speculators held more longs than shorts by a 12-to-1 ratio, the largest recorded difference in 5 years. That same week, U.S. crude prices hit a 9-month high of $110. And it's no surprise that when more than 80% of the market suddenly bets 12-to-1 on prices going up, oil prices do just that. And as you can see from this chart, Mr. President, these spikes occur in the last year or two. Before that, we did not have the spikes. Before this, there was this huge amount of speculation in the oil futures market. We did not have these large spikes which we've had in the last few years. The reality is that oil prices, again, are not just affected by physical supply and demand, but by speculative pressures on oil, on prices, speculative pressures on prices. That means if we're to get a handle on oil prices, excessive speculation must be curbed. There's a lot we can do to combat excessive speculation, and I've spelled out some of these steps in the balance of my statement, which I would ask the presiding officer to be included in the record.
Without objection.
Mr. President, just then in closing, until we limit excessive speculation in commodity markets, the American economy will continue to be vulnerable to violent price swings, and American consumers and businesses will continue to be whipsawed by oil prices unconnected to actual supply and demand. American families cannot afford the current price of oil and gas, and neither can our economy, which after 4 years is beginning to turn a corner towards real growth. Today's prices, nearing $110 for a barrel of oil and $4 for a gallon of gasoline, are a clarion call to action that Congress and the CFTC ignore at the nation's peril. Mr. President, I thank the Chair and I yield the floor.
Senator from Indiana.
Mr. President, this past Friday marked the 2-year anniversary of the passage of the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare. That law was signed into, or that bill was signed into law just 2 years ago this last Friday. I wasn't in the Senate at the time. I was actually in the state of Indiana campaigning to be in the Senate as a representative of that state. And as such, I had a very considerable amount of time crisscrossing the state and talking to Hoosiers about the health care plan and their response to what was going on in Congress and to the passage of that law. From small diners and restaurants all across Indiana to visits to small business, large business, medium-sized business, big industrial giants, small mom-and-pop operations, medical providers, ordinary citizens. We in Indiana joined the nearly 2/3, or perhaps even more than the 2/3 of the rest of the country that polled in opposition to the passage of this law. Hoosiers didn't then, and they don't now, want to have a one-size-fits-all nationalized health care system. They want a healthier health care system. They want reforms to the current cost problems and excessive rising costs of health care, and we outlined several of those, and this is really the first of many attempts that I will try to make as we go through the year addressing this plan, which is moving toward ever and ever greater implementation and particularly kicks in the years following this one. Hoosiers, as I said, did not want the plan then. They don't want it now. They don't want to have federal bureaucrats making their health care decisions for them. They want less government intervention and higher quality of care. And they don't want a health care system that increases costs and premiums while hurting job creators with fines and penalties. They want affordable care and good job opportunities. Now, 2 years after passage of that act, I continue to hear these messages from the people of Indiana and from others, and as we discover more and more information about what is contained in this massive 2,700-page bill that was passed in early 2010. I'd like to just discuss a few of the things of the impacts of this Obamacare law today, and then there'll be more, as I said, more to talk about later. The first is the individual mandate, and of course that's one of the issues the Supreme Court is hearing right now and will be making a determination on. Obamacare is the biggest example of government intrusion in the everyday lives of Americans, whether by forcing individuals to buy health insurance, enacting onerous regulations on small businesses, or by raising taxes and imposing penalties. The health care law forces every American to purchase a health insurance plan, or, if they choose not to do so, to pay the government a fine. This is unprecedented in American history. It is the first time the federal government is forcing citizens to purchase a product or a service that they may or may not want, or, as a consequence of not choosing to do so, pay a fine for their decision to say no. This administration basically is saying to Americans, we know what's better for you than you know for yourself. We know what's better for you than what your doctor suggests is needed. And if you don't get a government-approved health care plan, we're going to assess you with a fine. Now, that is a basic fundamental principle of constitutional law, and the Supreme Court will be making that determination. But I suggest that this Congress needs to continue to debate this and be prepared to act depending on what the Supreme Court decision is, which will come down later, several months from now. The second thing I'd like to talk about briefly is the higher costs that emanate from this particular piece of legislation. In addition to mandating that all Americans have health insurance, the Obamacare hits individuals and families with increased costs and higher premiums. The nation's nonpartisan budget experts at the Congressional Budget Office estimate that when fully implemented, this law will increase insurance premiums on a family policy by an average of $2,100 a year. Therefore, the Affordable Care Act is hardly affordable and increases the already high premiums that people are having to pay for insurance. The President's own chief actuary at the Center for Medicare Services reported that the law will increase national health care costs by $311 billion in the first 10 years alone. Increase is the key word here. Increases the cost by an additional $311 billion. So the goal of reforming the nation's health care system initially was to reduce the skyrocketing costs for Americans, not increase it. And yet we are now being told by the experts and the President's own people that it will increase costs. Secondly, I'd like to talk about the impact of this law on businesses. I talked to dozens, if not hundreds, of businesses across the state of Indiana, both in that campaign year of 2010 and then last year traveling as a senator throughout the state. The President's health care prescription results in bad side effects for American businesses by hitting the very job creators with new taxes and new regulations that they desperately don't need at this point in our struggle to regain economic growth. Take the employer mandate. The law penalizes businesses that do not provide employees with government-approved health care plan. Beginning in 2014, American businesses with more than 50 employees will be fined $2,000 per employee if they do not offer a health insurance plan approved by the federal government. Now, I've talked to a number of business people that have said, look, through painful negotiations with our workers and with our laborers and with our staff, we have put together a health care plan that is accepted both by management and by employees who recognize that if we cannot maintain some semblance of control over our costs, the jobs might not be available in the future because the company cannot afford to keep the people at work. And so in recognition of all this negotiation that goes on and the contractual obligations that both sides work to achieve, understanding that if the business is hit with too much tax and too many regulations, the business may not survive. Those plans now come under the scrutiny of the federal government, and the federal government will determine whether or not those plans are sufficient and adequate. And if it determines that they're not, then a fine is levied against the business. I cannot tell you how many business people told me, look, I will rather pay the fine than have the government impose all these new regulations on us when we are working carefully with each employee to make sure they have their basic insurance needs covered, that as the business grows and profits, we increase the benefits to them. But yet, if we are forced into a set plan of set procedures for every employee, then I have two choices, the business people say. I can either refuse to do so and pay the penalty of about $2,000 per employee, or I can let people go. But bottom line is, if I can't meet my bottom line, I cannot keep these people employed. The arbitrarily fixed basis that small businesses under 50 employees will not be subject to this leaves manufacturers and business people who are slightly below that level, say at the 45 or 40 or 35, a dilemma as they are seeking to expand their business. As soon as I hire number 50, then I'm into the plan, and I don't have the exemption. And so what do? I freeze out hiring more people and look to double up people's salaries or put people on overtime. And at a time when we have over 12 million people looking for a job and about another 11 million people underworked or working 2 and 3 part-time jobs just to make ends meet, we are imposing this law on them. It could not have come at a worse time. And then there's the medical device tax and this lineup of taxes that is included in this bill that we continue to find more and more of as we read the fine print in the so-called in the 2,700 pages of fine print. Indiana is a state that is home to a lot of medical device manufacturers. In fact, there are over 300 medical device registered manufacturers that employ 20,000 Hoosiers in the state of Indiana, and another 28,000 people that benefit from that employment. There are more than 400,000 workers nationwide by industry. And so what did the Obamacare plan propose? Well, we need some pay-fors. And the pay-fors are that we're going to impose a tax on these medical device manufacturers.
Senator's
President,
time
I
is expired.
sense that I am approaching a deadline in time, and I'm wondering if I could, with the consent of my colleague, ask for 5 more minutes to
Without objection.
I thank you, Mr. President. These medical device manufacturers are employing people that at an average rate of about 41% greater than the average worker rate of pay in my state. And so these are desired jobs. But again, employers and manufacturers of medical devices are telling me they're being forced to go overseas with the burden of regulation and a tax that has nothing to do with the essential program of the health care plan. And that's not the only tax. That's not the only tax that is imposed in this law. There are many hidden taxes here that we're just learning about. Let me name just 5. The excise tax on charitable hospitals, the drug industry tax separate from medical device, health insurance industry tax, insurer excise tax, and Blue Cross Blue Shield tax hike. The Joint Committee on Taxation found that the health care law imposes more than $550 billion in new taxes and penalties, most of which will fall on the middle class. Third, the impact on the state of Indiana. Obamacare forces states to expand Medicaid rolls so significantly that it will be imposed, and this has been talked about earlier today, imposed upon the states in a way that can cripple their ability to try to find some balance in their budgets. In Indiana, where our budget is in far better shape than many other states, we still cannot afford the current Medicaid program, let alone the projected new costs that will be required under the Obamacare law. An outside group has estimated that $3.1 billion in new costs over the next decade will be imposed on Hoosier taxpayers because of this health care law. This added expense does not include any payment relief to providers and therefore shifts the cost to patients by driving up premiums for all Hoosiers. In conclusion, Mr. President, we have to ask the question, what's the remedy for this fatal disease called Obamacare? Well, the remedy may lie with the Supreme Court, and they're hearing arguments on this today and will for the next 2 days. And we'll have a decision by April or June, May or June on the constitutionality of this law. But it also most likely will end up back here in Congress one way or another. And that leaves us the responsibility of addressing this. From forcing individuals to purchase insurance to taxing successful job creators and burdening state budgets, I believe the health care law is so deeply flawed that it must be scratched and replaced with real reform. Reform that lowers the cost of care, allows the doctor, your doctor, not the government, to decide the kind of medical care you need and provides flexibility to states. Mr. President, real health care reform lowers costs, improves access to quality care, empowers individuals, and preserves personal liberties. And that's not what we have in the law that currently is on the books. So whether through congressional legislation or court action, Obamacare needs to be overturned and replaced with common sense provisions that put patients, not government, not bureaucrats, in charge of health care decisions. Obamacare has proven to be the wrong prescription, and it's time for a new treatment. Americans want reform that remedies our ailing health care system, not one that weakens it and drives it deeper and drives us deeper as a nation into debt. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from New Mexico.
Mr. President, since this is the two-year anniversary